Okay, we are recording. Henry, how you doing today?
I'm doing really well, mate. Doing really well. How you doing?
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad. Henry, we always start this podcast with the same question, which is track one. And I'm going to ask you, please, mate, to tell me the song that you regard as having the greatest ever intro.
You got a wicked accent, by the way. I love that accent.
Well, I tell you
Proper.
what, mate, that don't happen very often.
Oh, yeah, that's cracking. I'm a big fan of accents. Love
Really?
them. Oh, yeah.
See, it's really weird because like Essex is it's a strange accent. It's kind of like the arse end of London, and yeah, it's not got all of the kind of colour and glamour that a good Cockney London accent's got. It's just kind of like I don't even know. It's really weird. Like
I find it a bit of a warmer accent than the Cockney accent. Like, particularly in Essex, and it kind of spreads down into Kent a bit, but that's not like,
yeah,
not proper estuary accent, that is it? But I've
no,
got mates in mates from like Broadstairs that have
yeah,
fake Essex accents, but I love
yeah,
it. Right?
yeah. It's really because Broadstairs. That's down. Am I right? That's down near Margate, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's all getting gentrified down there now, isn't it?
So I'm told. Yeah, so I
Yeah.
believe. I've not been there in
It's
a number of years, but it certainly wasn't gentrified last time I was there.
oh mate, when I was growing up and I used to get sort of taken to like Margate on holidays, like don't get me wrong, it was the shit because it was like 2p penny machines and stuff like that. And then I think going back there when I was about 19, I was like, oh actually, this is really horrible. And then now loads of my pals have like moved down there and it's like it's absolute hipster central now.
Yeah, that's what I was hoping would happen to Blackpool, but we just don't have the benefit of like being. Obviously, you got that train line that takes you straight into London, don't you?
Yeah.
So obviously it makes sense for people that want to work in London, but we don't really have anything comparable, really. I suppose Manchester, but people live in Manchester. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's weird, like because where Essex is kind of on the train line into London, and what's happening in London is it's got come out east. It's got more and more kind of the poorer, cooler area. The poorer areas now the cooler areas, and I'm reckoning in about 15 years' time it would have pushed further enough up the train line that like hopefully like my house would be worth another 15 grand more or something like that. You never know.
Well, I live in Salford. I just bought a house this year in Salford, and I was thinking, one as cheap as anything, because all I could afford. But I thought, one day it might be the same sort of thing. But yeah, that's not happened yet. We've got about one tap room, and that's about the only sort of.
Before you know it, mate, there'll be a couple of vegan cafes, mate, and you'll be up there, mate. Don't worry.
Yeah, well, we'll see. I want that fine line before it's full of twats, just that in
Yeah.
between spot.
Well,
Really.
that's kind of Margate. Margate's weird. You've got like kind of like some kind of like really kind of hipster sort of vegan cake shop, and then like you've got like a tap house and like a secondhand vinyl shop, and then you've got like three or four cash converters, and
Yeah,
it's
the
like,
vape shops and the cash converters, as long as they're still there, you
do you
know.
know what? What the fuck is the deal with a vape shop? I was literally like, where I live is not a particularly great area, and people love a vape shop where I live. And what's the deal? Like, how? I, I just don't get it. To open a shop can't be cheap. And
Mm.
like, how often do you go and buy some juice for your vape? It ain't like you're getting through 20 fags a day, is it?
I don't know. I mean, I've never been a vapor, but I,
Yeah.
I mean, people in my band are, and they razz it. So
What they love a vape shop.
I mean, I don't know. I don't know where they get it from, maybe online or something. But they go through the little whatever whatever the
Yeah.
things are. They go through them pretty quickly. I don't know. I suppose it's the same as anything, isn't it? Like I always wonder about phone shops. There's like 12 on the street at the bottom of my road. There's like 12 on one road, and I think they're right next to each other. I think how are you all? How like, I don't take my phone to these places. How are there this many of them? But
And also, I reckon I'll get a new phone every 2.5, 3 years.
mm,
Why do you need 10 shops in one road?
yeah, I don't know. But I'm an iPhone. It's all these people that are rocking the Android that they can upgrade this and you know what I mean? They're a bit
Yeah.
analog them phones. Whereas
Yeah.
iPhone, it's like taking your car to the dealership in it. So
Yeah.
only place that they can fix it is there. But
Yeah.
these are like a bit more cowboy operations. I kind of respect it. But
Yeah.
maybe, who knows? I don't know. Maybe it's more punk to be Android now. Maybe I'll go Android and set my phone to one of these spots. Some people are. Anyway, sorry.
One of the greatest starts to this podcast ever.
The first song, what was it? The song with the greatest intro.
Yes.
So I'm going with, and this was a very easy decision for me.
Wow, that's interesting because everyone says this is always the hardest one.
Oh, I think it's no contest for me anyway.
Right.
Living is a Problem Because Everything Dies by Biffy Clyro, which I don't know if you're familiar with that song.
It's a big one.
Oh yeah, it just has the most intense intro, and it's a bit smarty pants as well, which I like. And what an incredible intro to a record! It just immediately grabs your attention.
Yeah.
And they don't always do the full version of this live. I saw them at Download last summer, and they did like a sort of light version of it, which was still really cool. But that full version, it goes on for like two minutes or something. Wicked.
I have this weird thing with Biffy, and I have it with Muse as well. That like they're two bands that are like NME bands and Kerrang bands, and that's a hard thing to cross over and and to be able to kind of tick both them boxes. And I really liked was it Vertigo Bliss, the Biffy album with questions and answers and stuff. And I thought that was really cool. It reminded me like Idlewild and stuff like that. And then. And I don't think anyone really bought that record. I'm not just trying to be like cool indie kid. I was into them before anyone else. But like, then they've become this huge band, and the same as Muse. And I don't really get it anymore, right? And I'll tell you what, right? But I'd never seen them live, and I was lucky enough to blag like a +1 on my pal's invitation years ago to the NME Awards at Brixton Academy, and he was standing there doing a press thing, and I was just his +1 standing around like a spare prick at a wedding. And there was all of these like people that I was recognising from like on my favourite bands. Fucking, this is mad. Like, look, I'm seeing blah blah blah. And then I just see this fella, and normally the guy from Biffy Clyro, shirt off, Beach Boys tattoo on his chest, like hair all over the place, like just looks like a proper grimy rocker. And this fella walked past me with like this quiff and this suit on, and I was like, I honestly think I've just seen the most handsome man on the fucking planet. And then it dawned on me, I was like, that's that dude from Biffy Clyro. And I was like, mate, give that boy a side party and he's different level. He was like looked like a model. It was like,
he's a handsome guy.
Mate, like, I don't generally, it's very rare that a man will stop me in my tracks and I'll stare and just think, my God, that's a looker. It was like, oh my God, that fella is a proper handsome boy. And then they played. And I've never heard such a big sound from 3 people. It was fucking ridiculous. And I was like, I get it now. I get why people love this band. And it was.
Yeah, it is a big sound. It probably
huge.
The kind of biggest. Largest sound, because I don't think they have, because a lot of times you'll get bands that have like the little secret matey boy off to the side. I don't think, I could be wrong, I don't think they've ever had that. And it is just sort of wall of sound.
Yeah, it's huge.
3 people, which is really impressive, and they all sing, and they're incredible band. And I think interesting thing about that band is they've and it's been a bit of an inspiration for our band actually. They've definitely gone through like multiple sonic shifts, and there's been different eras to the band. And my sort of early musical education, at least in guitar music, came from my elder cousins. I don't have any older brothers or sisters, and they're about between like 8 and 10 years older than me. So they put me on to Biffy, it would have been that sort of Black and Sky, Vertigo Bliss era when I was like, I don't even know if I was a teenager at this point, but they were kind of showing me these records, and spiky, weird, mathy, but it kind of blew my head off. And I hadn't heard anything like it. I mean, it was pretty original even then, but I hadn't even heard any of the music that was informing that stuff. So it was nuts. And then they sort of, I started going to festivals and stuff, and they've been such mainstays at all of the major UK festivals for years, haven't they? Like Reading and Leeds and stuff when I was like 15 or whatever. And
so you said Download as well, because they cross over. Like,
That's an interesting point, isn't it? Yeah, that is rare that bands can do that.
yeah,
But that Only Revolutions record and Puzzle, which this song's from,
yeah,
just masterclasses in my opinion, in how to make a massive record that is loved by all, that is still has moments that are just utterly bizarre and really unusual, which is like this track. I think it like rocks literally in the traditional sense.
hmm
And it's got all these twists and turns that you just don't expect. And I love that. I love kind of being sort of surprised in a song when
yeah,
just even subtle things, when you expect it to go into a chorus and it goes into something different. It's
yeah.
just little things like that. I think it just keep you on your toes. I love it.
And it doesn't. And the fact that like they're such a huge band, and you can say the same for Muse. They don't do the predictable. You know, you just think, oh, hang on, that just took a tangent. Like, and you know, they're still one of the biggest, probably one of the biggest bands in the UK. And I just think it's really weird that, and I think it's great that bands out there don't have to write to a formula, can still kind of fuck with it and come up with these different like kind of twists and be hugely successful. Like, and I think a lot of that is testament to the fact that they built that following early doors, and then
100%, especially in the case of Biffy,
yeah,
like die-hard, lifelong fans, And like I say, it's been hugely informative for us. We try and a lot of times we'll kind of refer to their model in sort of a sense of how to do it, because we're all about kind of it's a marathon, not a sprint, and building a kind of a following and a I don't know, a kind of universe for ourselves to kind of live in and exist long term, rather than kind of chasing the shiny thing. And I think they're a perfect example of a band that have just they're never going anywhere. Do you know what I mean?
yeah,
And they've made the mark on the musical zeitgeist, at least in this country, in a huge way for guitar music. And they still write 6 songs. That I won't pretend to love every Biffy record, but that last one they just put out recently is fantastic. Like I jammed it the other day. I was like, this is brilliant.
yeah. I'm going to ask you now to tell me the first song you remember hearing that had an emotional impact on you, please.
This was a tough one, isn't it? Because emotional impact. I remember hearing kind of songs on the radio and stuff that my dad would play in the car. He was never, and he'll attest to this. I'm not doing him a dirty by telling you this, but he was never the most sort of musically informed or bothered about music.
Yeah.
Well, at least when I was growing up. It's a funny story. He got his car nicked once from our driveway when I was a little kid. He woke up to take me to school, like primary school, and he was like, "Someone's nicked my car," and they'd stolen his Ford Escort, but they'd thrown all of his cassettes out the window. So he's never, bless him. There wasn't that kind of like amazing vinyl collection that was handed down to me where I sort of got, fell in love with music. So a lot of it was kind of sort of bouncing around on the radio. And I sort of started to think about some of the first tracks that I kind of went out of my way to listen to. And when I first started kind of like, I'd say properly listening to music and really falling in love with it was when I was probably about 10 or 11. And it was the very, very start of like MP3 players. It was like the non-brand, like weird shit ones that could have like 20 songs on them. So I had one of them, and it was like kind of the other days of like LimeWire and things like that. But I remember falling in. I got one of the first albums I sort of like bought. Oh, this is another question, so I don't want to confuse the two questions. This was the first song that I remember kind of not just really enjoying listening to, but it kind of like really hit me in a different way. And I was kind of always into just when you're 10, it's just like, well, what's the craziest shit you can listen to? You know, so it wasn't necessarily hitting me in an emotional sense, other than it was just like, this is sick, just crazy rap music and metal and all sorts of wild, like the wilder the better. But there's a song on the big Outkast double album, Speaker Box and The Love Below, and there's a song on the Love Below section, which in my opinion is the best section, best half, and it's called Take Off Your Cool, and it's got Norah Jones on it, who's a beautiful singer, and it's just an acoustic guitar, and there's this like rain sound in the background, and it's a duet, and it's absolutely beautiful. And I was probably like 10 when I heard that song. I think it came out in 2005 or something. So maybe a little bit older, maybe 11 or something. But I remember just being like, whoa. And it was kind of the first time where I just had like, I can't do this now because it just melts my brain. But I used to just like have like repeat button on, and I'd listen to a song just, you know, walking to school or like on the bus or whatever, just like over and over and over and over and over and over again. And if that was a vinyl that I had, I would have like worn it out. You know what I mean? But it's a beautiful, beautiful song, and I still listen to it all the time. And I've actually realized I've like nicked little melodic elements from that song over the years and put it into songs of my own, just subconsciously, just because it's such a sort of formative track for me, that one.
It's an incredible album as well.
What? And they never really did it, you know, that it was like a genre that an album that defined an era almost.
Massively.
And then they never really did that much after it. They did one more record, they did the movie, and then they just kind of sailed off into the sunset. Kind of sick, really, but what a record.
Yeah, like just absolute dudes. And yeah, kind of really messing with genres and yeah, on paper that record shouldn't work. If you took that to a record company now and I got this idea, they'd laugh you out the building. And like,
absolutely.
But
You've got all this kind of like bebop stuff in there. You've got like proper like boom bap, like East Coast hip hop stuff in there. You got all like the Atlanta influence, and then you got like pop music and country music. It is like all over the place, but it's so cool. And I really like the idea that they went into the kind of like mixtape.
Yeah.
And that's kind of why it's a bit jarring.
Yeah.
And it works. But yeah, blew my head off. I went and it wasn't the first like physical record I bought, but I went and I remember because it had like the parental advisory sticker on. And I've always looked young for my age. So when I was 10, I probably looked about 3 years old. And this woman at Woolworths wouldn't let me buy it. So I waited around the store. I was just kind of skulking around the things, and I waited till she went on a break. And there was like a younger lad that took her place, and then I ran up and tried to buy it from him, and he let me buy it.
Oh, that's incredible. I just obviously being like well old, like I missed that. Like by the time them kind of stickers come, I think the first time I saw one of them stickers was when NWA dropped straight out of Compton. And I think I was probably about 15, 16 then. So I didn't have to sort of stress too much about it. But I just never consider that like kids are getting like ID'd to buy records.
It's kind of only affected my generation, weirdly, because now it's so ubiquitous, like swearing in music, that you know, like my brother-in-law, like he doesn't really bother about sort of censoring music that his like kids hear. They're quite mature for their age anyway, but he won't fuss too much about that. But it was that weird, what were they called? There's that weird thing in America in the 90s. And it was all the parents of, it was like a big like a social political organization that lobbied to have all these albums censored, and they went after Marilyn Manson in a big way. They were trying to have him like,
well, they absolutely went for Manson, didn't they? Because they thought that the Columbine school killings were triggered by them listening to Marilyn Manson records. And Marilyn Manson, you know, if what you read is said to be true, has done some pretty dark shit. But like, but what I did like in that documentary, the Michael Moore film about the Bowling for Columbine documentary, is when Michael Moore says to him, if you would have had an opportunity to talk to them two school killers, what would you have said to them? And he just answers, I wouldn't have said anything. I would have listened to them. And I thought, that's a fucking cool answer.
And well, he has a long history of, again, for all his faults, absolutely not trying to glamorize that guy. It's pretty terrible and bummed me out because I grew up on a lot of his music. But especially in the 90s, when I'm trying to remember the name of this organization, they were really famous, but it was always on like talk shows and on like the radio, the like news night and stuff at the time. And they would always get him on, and he would always outclass them. He was really good at kind of just making them seem what they were, which was really unreasonable.
You're not talking about the religious family that go and picket like the.
No. I've run into them. I've met.
What?
Yeah. They came and picketed a Warp Tour that we did one year. It's in, is it Kansas City they're in? I can't remember, but whatever city we were in,
Yeah.
we rolled through their neighborhood basically, and they all came out and picketed it, and we all kind of like just went, and we didn't go in like a costume or anything. We just kind of stood and we're like, this is so weird, because we've seen all like the Louis Theroux thing.
Yeah, of course.
So loads of people were there, and it was really funny. Is it Hailstorm, that pirate metal band? Whatever they're called.
Yeah.
They were on the tour that year, and so obviously what was the name? I can't even remember it all of a sudden. It's I'm not doing very well at this, am I? But they have that sign, God hates. I'm not going to use the
Yeah. Well, they've got signs that God hates everyone or anything,
exactly.
pretty much. Yeah,
that's like their famous one.
Yeah.
So this band had God hates pirates, and they were just using it, and they printed a load of t-shirts and sold like thousands of them on that day. It was brilliant. Everyone's walking around with these God hates pirates t-shirts. And then someone else just had one say "Bring back the McRib." I thought it was really funny. But yeah,
shout out the McRib.
Yeah, exactly. No, very strange, but yeah, I'll remember the name of this probably at 3:00 in the morning tonight. But they're all over any interview you see of these parental advisory things, it was really pushed by this group, and I remember it was all through sort of the late 90s and early 2000s, which was when I was like buying CDs. It was like really hard to buy a parental advisory CD, and my mum just bought into it, so she was just like, "You're not having that." I remember my cousin, the aforementioned cousin who got me into like a lot of cool bands, does not like hip hop, still doesn't. So I didn't really know about anything, but I was big into it at the time when I was like 10, 11. So for Christmas, he's like, "Oh, I just went to HMV and just said, what's like a good hip hop record at the moment?" And he bought me, it was Method Man's Tickle album, Wu-Tang Clan. And it has like the world's biggest parental advisory sticker on it. And to be fair, it is pretty explicit. And my mum, I'm just like jamming it in my bedroom. My mum walks past and she's like, "What is this? And who got you this?" I was like, "Oh, Owen did." She was like, "Well, you're not having this." Took it out and took it off me. And they moved out of the house that I grew up in about 3 or 4 years ago. I've obviously long since moved out, but they came. My mum, when she brought a load of stuff around to my house that was just like in the loft or whatever, she's like, "Do you want this CD, by the way? I found it in the back of my closet. It's been there for like a decade." I was like, "Yeah, I'll take it, actually." So I burned it on my computer like it's 2005. But
it's quality.
But they were a big thing, those parental advisory stickers, yeah.
And it weren't just hip hop at that point, though, was it? You know, you've got like literally new metal was just popping off then, wasn't it? You've got your, all of the dumb shit Fred Durst was saying. I'm sure there was parent advisories all over half of that. And
we put one on our second album as a bit of a homage to all that.
Nice.
I mean, there was obviously a couple of songs with like a swear word in, but it's not exactly really explicit. But just because we just are all new metal kids growing up on like Korn and Limp Bizkit and Deftones and all of that, Slipknot, it was just like a little bit of a
It's weird, isn't it? It's like I think time's been kind of over time when you look back at that point, and I've long run an alternative venue and have done for pretty much 30 odd years, and so we was playing that music when it was happening at that time, and you can't sort of explain just how big bands like Limp Bizkit were and Slipknot, but I think as time has gone on, you've seen the bands that are still kind of playing the nostalgia tours like Limp Bizkit, and then you've seen bands like Deftones just become incredible and more incredible and just constantly just develop to the point where they're making essentially shoegaze records and like dream pop records and just I'm a huge Deftones fan.
They're like my favorite band.
Oh man,
I got to see him. I hadn't seen him since I was like a teenager, and I got to see. We played a big festival in Germany this summer, and I got me and Mike, our guitarist, who's also a massive Deftones fan. We got to go watch him, and we watched about 2 songs in, sort of from the back with a pint, and then we were like, "Should we just like go in?" So we went like right to the barrier, like I was like a teenager again, and we were just like jumping up and down. Like, it was so good, and they're still sick. They sound amazing.
So good, so good. I got to speak to the drummer on this podcast, and for me, no one's got a better snare drum than him. It's just
Yeah.
like on that early stuff, just that the way that snare drum popped, it was like, oh, yeah.
That's a big part of that new metal sound people don't talk about a lot, is the kind of and I think it comes from kind of like a lot of the hardcore, like East Coast hardcore stuff from like the 90s, that real kind of like poppy snare. That's what everyone always hates on it, but I always love that St. Angus snare because I love the kind of basketball sound of
Yeah.
drum, but that like it's iconic, isn't it? The start of
Yeah,
my start of
massively. Who was the producer that produced all of that new metal stuff? What's his name?
Terry Date, I think.
No, it's another one.
Terry Date did the Deftones stuff. Ross Robinson did
Ross Robinson, that's what I was thinking
he did
of.
all
Yeah.
the corn
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah. Okay, right. Let's go to school. Tell me the track that soundtracked your years at school.
So I'm going with this one, and it was a hard one. It's very formative years and really, really getting into everything music for me, particularly to an annoying level. I just obsess over it. But I'm going to go with "Sorry You're Not a Winner" by Enter Shikari, which yeah, there you go, clap, clap, clap. That 2007, well, it was on like a demo EP before the album came out, but that came at a time when I was young enough to kind of catch a first wave of something that was truly underground. So this hadn't been informed really by like even something like Kerrang or a music publication. I'd caught this from like MySpace, people sending it around on MySpace. So it really felt like me and my friends who loved this early Shikari stuff were onto something that no one else knew about. And I went to go see him play like a it wasn't quite a pub, but it was no bigger than about 200 cap, I remember the sweat was actually dripping from the ceiling, one of those gigs where it like condenses on the ceiling. And it was absolutely brilliant. And the kind of mix of sort of Prodigy style electronic music with the kind of like screamy stuff that I was into at the time was obviously it's quite polarizing anyway, but for me at that particular time in my life, it married all the things that I was really into.
Yeah.
And that track is obviously like still so pretty iconic. Like everybody knows that song. And we actually got to play like the 10-year anniversary of that record. They did like a couple of shows around it. And they got us on a support, which was mint because I got to just watch them play that whole record, which I thoroughly enjoyed. But at that time, I wouldn't go on to say that that song was particularly informed the music that I play or even the music that I still listen to, but it just reminds me of being in like house parties, being about 15, 16-year-old with a bottle of White Lightning or something, going mental and going to all these like little gigs and or driving somewhere, your mate's got his first Corsa because he's old enough, you're a year younger or whatever, and he's got your table and and the recording was dead shit, which I love. Like it sounds a bit shit, but that's what makes it really great.
And let's shout out the video because the video to that, I was probably like, I guess I would have been like 30 by the time that came out, but and what way too old to be a kind of scene star. But I remember seeing that video and just thinking, this sounds really different and this looks really exciting. And I think like the Deftones, I think they've just done their own thing, and it's fucking batshit at times, but it's always fucking great. And also the nicest people ever. Like they're just so nice. And got nothing but love for that band. And that track is just still, it gets played every Friday in my club, and you will see kids that are 18 now and they're still doing it, and it's like awesome. Yeah, it's I've literally just got goosebumps doing that. Just thinking, I'm just picturing the kids going mad to it still. And what's that? 20 years old now?
Well, it's 2007 it came out, I think.
Right.
So yeah, getting there. It's
crazy.
Yeah, it's iconic, isn't it? And I think that you're totally right. It's a wider point of like bands that tread their own path.
Yeah,
Is there's something amazing about that, because it doesn't always go the way you want it to when you do that.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes, especially bands like that got kind of an early big win.
Yeah.
It's hard, that, I think, because you've kind of got to maintain that, and you are then going to have so many pressures to sort of do the same thing again, or conform to what is big in the league that you're in at that point, which is almost the mainstream. At the time when they were big, they were you know, cover of Enemy and really doing sort of like big rooms and things for such a band. But I think they've, like you say, they've done at times utterly bizarre things in terms of like the music they make, and I think that's why people absolutely love them, and why they've never, I don't think they've even really plateaued. They've definitely never dipped at any point. They've just had a steady trajectory of success, and it's because they've like never really conformed to anything other than what they want to do, and I love that.
And even when they blew up, you know, choosing their support act to be Rory's brother, P-Dex, who's just going to play.
I remember that. I was at that tour. Yeah,
just going to play drum and bass, and it was just bananas, and it was like such a cool thing to do. Love it. What
they
about
played? Well, it never happened, but they were supposed to play at the Empress Ballroom in Blackpool. I mean, all my mates went down. We all had tickets, and we were queuing up, and they were sound checking, and then the roof collapsed, and then they had to call the whole thing off. But they hung around like all night, just signing shit, and in like the lobby, because there's like loads of different rooms to the Empress Ballroom. Yeah. They hung around like signing shit and playing acoustic stuff, and lovely people. Yeah,
that's what you want from your pop stars, isn't it?
100%. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Love it. Right. First song you remember buying from a record store, please, mate?
Well, it's an album, but Hybrid Theory, Linkin Park. First record I ever bought, still holds up to this day. Probably at least top 3 nu metal records. Yeah. Maybe the best in terms of like through and through nu metal. Just it's kind of a pop record, isn't it? Like
hugely.
Hooks coming out the wazoo, just brilliant, but so hard. I remember the cool kid in school, in primary school, Mike Simmons at the time. He's really good at football and he's really tall. So you know, he's a nice kid. He wasn't like the mean cool kid. He had like I think he had like a Walkman, like a CD Walkman. I remember him showing it me in the changing rooms in primary school, and it just popped my little head like a grape. I couldn't believe it because I never heard anything like it. And then I asked for it for my birthday, I think, because I would have been 9-10 years old.
Yeah.
And it'd probably been out a couple of years at that point, but yeah, phenomenal. And I still listen to it all the time.
It's like when I got your list sent over, I went and pulled up Hybrid Theory, and you know, mentioning me club again. Even now, you can drop any of the singles off that record, and kids still sing every single word. It's it's stood the test of time. A lot better than I think a lot of them other bands from that era as well.
Yeah, it's aged really well. The production on it is like stellar, which for a debut album for like a nu metal band in the 90s is probably only one, really.
Yeah.
And yet, even like the album songs everyone knows, like I think it's just wall to wall. I always remember that weird, it's like track 11, that weird like interlude, like scratch track that they have.
Yeah,
it was really bizarre, but I always liked that as well. I remember like bouncing around in my grandparents' like spare room listening to that all the time as a kid. Love it. And now I like cover it in band practice and bounce around my own band. It's great.
Love it. I want to just go back to school before we get on to the next question. And what did you want to be when you was at school?
I wanted to be an actor.
Okay.
I did a lot of it as a kid. I was like a child actor. So I used to do like just like school plays and stuff. But then I went to like a sort of like a Saturday morning, like acting, you know, just where you send your kids on a Saturday morning to get them to do something. It was just in the middle of Blackpool. And I really enjoyed it. And then because Manchester's obviously nearby, and it's where a lot of the like, well, it is now, but even at the time in the sort of early 2000s, it was where they used to do a lot of casting for like a lot of sort of soap opera-y British, like Waterloo Road and like all that, Coronation Street, all that kind of thing. And the sort of owner of the acting school was like, oh, they've got these auditions coming up for these things. If you fancy, like, they've asked for a couple of kids, so we thought about sending you down if you wanted to go. And I was like, yeah, okay, yeah. And I went for something. I can't remember what it was, but I didn't get it. But the another one came up, like the second one, and it was like this film with, it had like Michelle Collins in it, if you remember her. And I got the part, and it was like a whole summer of filming. And it was this short film called The Illustrated Mum, which was Jacqueline Wilson. Remember that is an adaptation of one of her books. And it ended up winning like an Emmy and a BAFTA and all this stuff. And it was wicked. I really enjoyed it. It was like a whole summer, and there was like because it was a kids' film, so there was loads of kids. I had loads of friends. I had a wicked time. It was filming all around Salford and stuff. Ironically, where I live now, but like all around my neighborhood now. But also got to kind of experience just sort of like people doing creative stuff for a living, and I really enjoyed it. And I went on to do more stuff after that, but I didn't really enjoy it as much because it was just I found it to be quite sterile. Like, I liked acting because we used to do like plays and things like that, and you'd have like people in the audience, and you kind of like react with them. And I quite enjoyed that element of it, but I never really enjoyed the sort of, okay, we can do it again now from this angle, and then we do it. It was very, very sort of, like I say, sterile is probably the only word I would use. So I did that up until I was about 13, and then I just stopped doing it. I just kind of lost interest in it, really. But that's what I thought I wanted to do at the time. And then I think latterly, obviously, I did enjoy the kind of performance. I mean, I fell in love with music by that point, so all I really cared about was like hanging out with my friends and being in bands and stuff. But I think the kind of performing in front of a crowd obviously left a bit of an impression on me, because it's what I do now for a living.
Yeah. So you're a confident kid.
Really confident, yeah. Annoyingly so. Sorry, my phone's just going mental. I'm just going to mute it. Annoyingly confident, to be honest. Like, my mum always tells me that I would, age 3 or 4, just be like chewing the ears off all the adults at the Christmas party sort of thing. I just always had a big gob on me, really. And I think just my parents were really good at just kind of like asking me what I thought about things and just talking to me like an adult, really, from being a kid. So I just always used to enjoy talking to people and hearing people's opinions on things, and having a discourse about stuff. So I think I was quite confident. Yeah, I mean, I suppose I had pretty traditional kind of standard insecurities from puberty onwards, as everyone does, really. I struggled with high school a little bit, like the change there to sort of big school and things, and I had like ADHD and like dyspraxia and things, which were quite challenging. But pretty confident. Yeah, I've always been quite lucky in that aspect.
Yeah. Tell me the song that soundtrack your years clubbing.
So I initially put a song. It was by Chasing Status, because I remember that being on a lot of the time.
Oh, that's a good one, that.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and I went. I being from Blackpool, especially. I mean, I caught tail end of it, but in the 90s, it was like a huge clubbing destination. We had like the only super club outside of London, which I managed to sneak into once when I was about 15. But things were quite lax then, and I used to borrow like mates' IDs, and I used to go clubbing from being about at least 16, maybe even a little bit younger, actually. And it was great. I really enjoyed it. Like I didn't really know much about dance music, and I was really into just like metal and punk and stuff at the time. But it was just everywhere. It was just kind of what you did. But I was gonna say, actually, the song actually I've changed my mind is I wanted to talk about was Heartbroken by T2.
Mm-hmm.
That is so indicative of the music that was coming out of every crap little bar and every club in the north, in that particularly in that period of time when I was going there, sort of, you know, the very early 2010s and the late 2000s. Just baseline at the time in the north of England was just everywhere, and it was like that track particularly obviously ended up doing like big top 40 stuff, that sort of, so you couldn't get rid of it off the radio for a long time. But that kind of sound was just reminds me so much of being very wet behind the ears and you know, having a VK or whatever the fuck they're called, a blue whipped, you know, and just bopping around in my shirt, sweat my head off. I loved it, and all the kids in my school were quite into like house music and stuff, and I didn't really get it, but I think going out in a club environment, it kind of contextualizes it a lot, and I could really enjoy it. I wouldn't go home and listen to it, but when I'd be out, it'd be loads of fun.
Was you getting exposed to kind of, was there any sort of like rock clubs or anything like that in the area?
Yes, and anyone from Blackpool that's over the age of about 18 will tell you there was a club. It still exists now in a sort of not very good, sort of reincarnation of the original one, but there's a club in Blackpool called the Tash, which existed from, I think, about 1978 until about 2012. And it was, it used to be called Barney's. So it was a bizarre sort of, it looked derelict. And it was just by the train station. So it was sort of a little bit off the beaten track of like the main kind of clubbing strip, as it were, in Blackpool. It's sort of near like all like the industrial, you know, red light district-y kind of rough part of it. But it was good, really, because all the little weirdos like us, all the moshers, used to kind of, we're out of the way then, because it was Saturday night in Blackpool. Quite, I don't want to put anyone off, but especially back then, it could be quite a rough spot. And if you had like long hair and a fucking fringe over your eyes, you're a bit of a target, really. So that's being out of the way, really. And it used to be called Barney's, this club. So inside, it was like the Flintstones. That was like the decor from the old
bedrock.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it had all this kind of weird fake like rocks and stuff on the wall, and all these weird murals of like the Flintstones. But they just left it like that because it was weird. And it was just a rock, it was 2 floors, just a rock club. And it was definitive. It was where everybody went. And I think they used to have gigs on in there, but I never saw any there. And then sadly, they've sort of developed the whole area now. So they knocked it down, and there's like a giant like Sainsbury's there now, unfortunately. And they've done like a little sort of second version of it above a pub. That's been there for about 10 years. But at the time, that was, I mean, every town kind of has one, don't they? That like the rock club where you go to. And the nice thing about them is they tend to last.
Yeah.
Like, well, you said yours been open for how long did you say?
We've been open 38 years, man.
That's insane. Yeah, that's wicked. And every other club tends to have a much shorter half-life, really. But like the Satan's Hollow in Manchester has been open for at least 2 decades, you know, and because there's always going to be that demographic of weirdos like us that want to find that little safe spot, I think.
100%. Well, look, we're talking about home, so I'm going to take you home for track 6. Tell me a favourite song from an artist from your home county, please.
Well, I'm a bit embarrassed about this, actually.
Why is that?
I kind of couldn't find any. I even Googled, like, you know, artists from Lancashire. I was
what you got? What was on the list?
I'll look now. Hang on one sec. I knew the Buzzcocks were one of them.
Wonderful.
Yeah. I wouldn't put them in my top, you know, my top list, but a good band. Bands from Lancashire. Let's have a look, shall we? The Puppets, the Nolans, Section 25, the Stiffs, a band called Witch Hazel. That's about it, really. There's got to be more. I mean, we're not on there for one. But yeah, I couldn't really find any, and I thought
that's slim pickings.
It is really, isn't it? It is. But there's some really great bands now. So the band that I picked there's actually 2 bands that are. One of them is a band that I grew up with, and they were a fantastic band when we were kids, and they've kind of reincarnated as a new band now who are amazing, do really, really cool things called Strange Bones. And then it's featuring a band called Calva Louise, who are actually from Venezuela via Blackpool. They all live in Blackpool now, and the two bands kind of like operate and share. They're kind of one machine, you know what I mean? They kind of like do each other's artwork and videos and produce their own the music together and stuff, which is really cool. And then they both collaborated on this track, which is called 9 Lives, which is just brilliant. But they're pretty inspirational. And the band Strange Bones was 3 brothers. And when we were kids, they were a band called Outlaw. They'll probably be mad at me for telling you about this, because I think they cringe a little bit, because they were on Blue Peter when they were like 10. And they've all got this big on them. But they supported like Rancid. We're on tour with Rancid. They've toured Japan. When I was in like year 8, they were off going to Japan to do this, to play Rebellion, and did like national tours. It was super support. I think they supported the Buzzcocks actually.
Yeah.
Sham 69, you know, all sorts of stuff like that. UK subs. And they were playing like proper British like snotty punk stuff, and they were really like, they had like mohawks and like the proper like old school little shrunken, you know, like you put a load of like 1970s punks in the wash. It was great. And then they kind of went off and did their own thing and went to university, or I don't even know if they did, whatever they did. But now they're a band called Strange Bones, and they marry kind of like, again, sort of like through and through punk with sort of like Prodigy style electro and dubstep and stuff like that, and they do it really well in a very unique way that's their own. And Calva Louise are a really, really cool band as well, who are actually coming on tour with us later on this year. And yeah, this track is sick, and they're, for my money, the best 2 bands in Blackpool at the minute, or at least in Lancashire that I know of. I was trying to get away with thinking of a Manchester band, but then I thought Manchester hasn't been Lancashire since 1972, so I don't think I can really get away with that.
Yeah, they're spoiled over there. Like,
yeah, of course they are. It's such a rich. Why do you think that is? Why are there so many amazing bands from one city?
Henry, that is why I started this podcast. This podcast was going to be in a very different format. Hence, it's called Off the Beat and Track Podcast. I wanted to speak to people because one of my best mates is an actor now, but he used to be a rapper, and he's a podcast called Scroobius Pip. And this come about just through, like, me and Pip run clubs together and stuff. And I was chatting to Pip, and he lives in Essex, like literally just up the road. And he was like, in every interview at the moment, people just keep asking me if I'm like live in London. And he's like, no. And they're like, oh, like, how come? And he's like, well, I quite like Essex. And it's like, yeah, I know, but like London, he's like, and so I thought it was bizarre that, because we've got other bands from where we live that like the Horrors and things like that just relocated straight to London.
Oh yeah.
And I find it really intriguing as to why people feel to achieve success you have to move to London, or if you said Manchester, like, because I'm sure there's you know, if you can afford to live in London, then I'm sure there's, you know, there's probably benefits to being that central to record company buildings maybe, and scouts that are going around the venues. But is that a little bit 1990s? Does that still work like that now? We live in the internet where, unfortunately, people are also scouting bands that have got X amount of TikTok fucking hits or whatever. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I don't know, but that was the kind of idea
that's really interesting.
It was going to be based in Essex to start with, and I have to speak to all the bands that I know from around here and actors and whatnot about why Essex, why have you not moved like into the capital, or you know, and I just, that was the idea, and but then I started getting presented with opportunities to speak to people that weren't from Essex. I was like, oh, shit, I really like to speak to them. Like, so the podcast kind of evolved. But yeah, I don't know. And you look at, like you say, like taking nothing away from where you live, you've just pulled up that list, and you know, Section 25, the Nolans, you know, the Buzzcocks, who I thought were from Manchester, and then you go across to Manchester, and my God, where do you start and stop? You know, from the Roses to the Mondays to Oasis to New Order to the Smiths, it's like, it's ridiculous, and like, and you know, and that's just kind of indie. Like
that was a big thing for our band. Actually, it was one of the main things that we wanted to do was just play shows we play shows in London, and we
Yeah.
kind of had to start. It was like our third ever gig. We got like an old Royal Mail postal van and converted into like a bandman and drove down there, and because nobody would take any notice of us up here, like you couldn't get anyone to pay attention, and people had no idea where we're from. And we'd be getting sort of things like, oh, can you just come down to London and do even when we started to get some traction, we get like a manager we had at the time, can you come down to London and do this? And like, 6 hours, mate. Like,
yeah.
Oh, you actually live 6 hours away. I'm like, yeah. And it's really, really far away. And I think luckily now it is becoming less and less of a necessity. But we've never like sort of bought into that. And there's a lot of bullshit sort of music industry kind of schmoozy stuff, and a lot of there's sort of bands that kind of really thrive off that and love kind of going to all these like industry parties and award shows and stuff. We've never really felt comfortable in that environment, but each to their own. But I do think it is weird that there's kind of a necessity. I mean, ironically, I live in Manchester now, but the rest of them all still live in Blackpool, and I'm there, nearly every day anyway. But there's very much like a kind of urge to sort of move to a major city, but it's pretty unaffordable to live in these cities. Like it makes sense that you would stay in somewhere like Blackpool, and because the rent's cheaper and you can spend your time actually creating and stuff. I've never understood it myself. But funnily enough, there is actually quite a lot of famous people from Blackpool, like Robert Smith from The Cure's from Blackpool, or was born in Blackpool.
Yeah.
Well, obviously, The Cure aren't from Blackpool, but do you know what one goal of mine actually was? I used to live in Stockport, and as you drive in, you'd see the sign that says, "Welcome to Stockport, home of the Blossoms." I thought one day I want to be big enough that there's a "Welcome to Blackpool, home of Boston Manor" sign, and that's mine.
Does it honestly say "Home of the Blossoms"?
Yeah, it's got the band logo on it and everything.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, mate, we need to get the Prodigy on "Welcome to Essex."
Yeah, oh, definitely.
Why have we
Pretty
not got that?
Prodigy erode that at this point.
Well, they've got to have Braintree. I mean, Basildon. You got the big Basildon sign like on the side of the road. Like I don't know if you've ever seen this. We've got a place in Basildon, and basically, but Basildon is literally the next sort of little town to where my club is, and it's a pretty bizarre place. But Depeche Mode are from there, and so they're like, we're fiercely proud of them. And on the side of the road, alongside the motorway, you've got the words Basildon, like Hollywood. And it's fucking surreal. And behind that, you've got the centre where the clubs and that are, which is called Bas Vegas.
I love that. I'm such a big fan of that. And I do think with we started this conversation talking about Margate and how that's become like its own spot now. And I do think with the way that sort of everything's going with the economy anyway, and just kind of, I think it's a bit 90s, like move into the big city. I do think it's going to be really cool for like places like Basildon and Blackpool. Yeah. People are going to kind of stay there and make it sick, because
I hope so.
I have to go somewhere else, And Blackpool's definitely getting a lot better. We've got some cool little venues now which we didn't have, and like a little pizza shop, and just lots of little independent businesses that are opening. And I love to see it. It's wicked.
And it's so weird. You look at like I look at actors, and I've got friends that wanted to be actors, to come from where I come from, but couldn't not have a day job, so they couldn't go to all the auditions. Whereas you're seeing lots of the actors that are now some of the biggest names in UK film. I can tell you for sure there was not anybody called Benedict Cumberbatch at my school. You don't see many people called Darren smashing it in Hollywood at the moment. But I do think it's like, if you can afford to be able to sustain living in London and being a struggling musician or a struggling actor, like, I think you need to have somebody financing that, because I think that's causing problems for the music industry and the arts in general, that it is becoming quite a privileged scene, and
it is, and that's part of a wider conversation, and that's a brilliant point, is that I always say it's becoming like a middle class privilege, really, is being, especially a rock musician, because there's so much involved, so much cost involved. You can't just sit and make it at home on your lap. Well, some people can, but you need studios, you need equipment, you need transport. And you know, we were lucky enough that when we started out, our parents let us live at home rent free for like 3 years. You know,
Yeah.
Not many people are afforded that luxury.
Yeah.
You know, we were on tour all the time, to be fair. So, you know, I'd come home for a week, be like, all right, mum, and then off again for however long. But
Yeah.
you know, it's not everyone has that privilege, and we're very, very lucky to have had that. And you know, we were by no means rich. We're still not. But we definitely weren't funded by anybody, but we were just had the ability to live off nothing, which not everybody does. And I think that's why, you know, people talk about, I see all these, you know, fucking people like, I don't know, Bono and the just, or what's his face from The Who, people like that just kind of
Roger
say,
Daltrey.
Roger Daltrey, they don't make rock music like they used to. You know, people don't make rock music anymore. I'm like, because they can't fucking afford to, man. And they don't get paid. They don't get, you know, $1 million record deals, and they don't get to just like not do anything else. You know, like it's kind of, this is my full-time job, but I have a second job now on the side because I can't live with my mum. I need to pay the mortgage, and you know, we do all right. You know, I could probably scrape by without having it, but. And I know it's unlikely that unless you get to the complete upper echelons of the musical landscape that you'll ever be like really comfortable on just music alone, because it just isn't that. The pie is much smaller, and the big, you know, there's only so many slices in it these days. So it's just a reality, really. So if you want to continue, you kind of just need to be a bit of a hustler. So all my friends in bands do like stuff on the side, or they have a second job or something, because you need to.
And I think Bono is quite short-sighted insofar as, insofar as a lot of things.
I actually don't know if it was him that said that, so don't quote me. I was just using an example.
But the thing is, it's like for anybody that's, you know, an established musician from decades past, they need to look at the industry now. And for somebody, if you even to use U2 as an example, so they had moderate success with that first record. Moderate success in Ireland and the UK, in the Ireland and England, sorry. If that was a band now that put their first record out and they had that level of success, maybe there's a chance the record company might have very, very push give them a second record. U2 didn't blow up big until what, I guess, Joshua Tree. So what's that, album 4 maybe?
That's
like,
yeah.
You know, that's a lot of nurturing and support and money thrown at them, you know. And I think in this day and age, unless bands smash it with that first record now, if you're signed to a major record label, you ain't getting that second album. It's so ruthless now.
Well, the problem is that in the 90s, there was a real kind of like, and I think it was only a product of circumstance, but there was a real culture within the major record labels of like the hotshot A&R guy, and there was a lot of clout about, you know, who could kind of like break the coolest band. So they were really nurturing, you know, weirder, for lack of a better term, weirder acts, and really giving them artistic room to breathe. You know, and you had bands like Radiohead, who, to be fair, it's probably a bad example because Creep was just an enormous hit on their first record. But, you know, bands of that ilk that were doing really unusual things and being given big sums of money to do it. You know, you look at, like, I suppose a better example would be like some of the Creation Records stuff that was just being, you know, Loveless, I think, was given one of the highest budgets ever on an album, and it's quite a weird record. I love it, but there was a culture then of that, of kind of, you know, if you could have the coolest band, then you had sort of value. But now it's more analytical. It's more about like physical numbers and what can stream the most. But the problem is that you've created certain channels with which to grow that audience. So what you're doing is you're funneling all this sort of product, this art, into these like much narrower channels that can only reach audiences a certain way. So you're kind of homogenizing music to tick these certain boxes. and you're kind of making people operate within a certain framework. So you're sort of like jamming a load of squares into a load of circular shaped molds, really. And a lot of the best art comes from kind of weird people, to be quite honest, that don't really want to kind of sit there and make TikToks and become a children's entertainer, children's TV presenter. But you're kind of having to become that in order to just service the wider goal of getting your art out there. And it's just kind of diluting everything, really. I mean, I know everyone knows this, but it's just kind of not really talked about enough, I don't think.
Yeah. I had a guest on the other day who's a pop writer and performer. And she said that word that really kind of jarred me. Not in a negative way, but just like, oh, that's the thing, is it? She went, yeah, if you're writing like a TikTokable song. And I thought, shit,
it's mental.
Is that a thing now? A TikTokable song? But then, you look like this. I think just to go back to what you said about creation and using like the Valentines as an example, that's a great example. But I think that's testament to the culture around independent labels then as well. And because whereas if you would sign to Sony and your record wasn't, recouping what they'd spend, you're gone. But whereas I think creation, I've seen a few of the docs and I've had McGee on here, and and he said he'd be like, right, okay, let's just license Teenage Fan Club in America, and like we'll get a bit of money for that, or let's go and send Swerve Driver out to America and we license them, and then that can help pay for that. And it was always like robbing Peter to pay Paul, and like whatever it took to get this stuff out, and the hustle, and I love it. And I think that I don't know how much that still exists now. I know that Alan's still got creation under sort of several guys. He's for the management and stuff, and he's putting music out. And I look at I've had the guys at Transgressive on the podcast, and Transgressive are a great example of an independent label. That from way back, I think the first record they put out was Subways, I believe, and then seeing how they've evolved and what that label's become. And I do think that the underground scene, whether it be metal, whether it be indie, whether it be whatever, I do think relies on them kind of mavericks at them labels that are still, and coupled with just really fucking forward-thinking, progressive, creative young people that I'm realizing I sound like quite a granddad when I say this, but that are jumping on a Mac and making music and putting their records out and doing it themselves. I think that we're certainly going to see in the coming years of the cost of living there. People are going to get more and more DIY, like we did in fucking lockdown. Everybody was like, right, what? What I mean? What have I got at my disposal? I can't do this. I can't do this. So, okay, what have we got? Let's see what we can do with that. And that, I think you get really interesting shit from that.
It's fucking brilliant. And you look at we made half a record on our Macs remotely, and it was great. It's just sort of a new way of approaching, a new way of problem solving, really. But you look at bands like Bring Me the Horizon, who've made Grammy nominated #1 albums on a MacBook with nothing else.
Yeah,
and it can definitely be done 100%. And I think, going back to your previous point, I think independent labels will always be the home of interesting music generally. Whether it's stuff like the Creation Records stuff to even like Sharp Tone, our label, who have been and Pure Noise, our previous label, who have both been absolutely brilliant and have championed some incredible records over the last decade. And the thing with them is that all these indie labels is that they've got more skin in the game. They've got more to lose. They are taking they're only three sizable investments on a bad album away from just collapsing. Really, so
which is insane, right?
Yeah, it's mental. Their margins are really thin. They have tiny. Pure Noise. You still talk to those guys all the time. I saw them the other day. They're fantastic, and they put out some of my favorite records, which is they're sick. But I think last year they had something like 30 bands on their roster, and there's about 5 people that work for the label. They're working hard, and
that's a labour of love, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm trying to say. It's a true labour of love, and I love to see it, man. And it's how you get an Aphex Twin to sell 5 million copies because people won't take a chance on weirdo music like that, and I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, last track. Tell me the song that you think many people may not know that you would like them to hear.
What did I pick? Oh yeah, 3 on a Match by a band called Foxin, who are sorry, give me just 1 second. Who are an amazing band from America. I think they're from Atlanta, I'm not sure, but this track is just a very, very gentle, pretty song that ends a record with. And it's just sort of like one of those tracks, I think, that a bit like some of like Jeff Buckley or like Elliott Smith's music, where even if you're not really dialed into that world and you play it to your mum or someone, they'll just be like, wow, what an amazing song. What a well-written, beautiful piece of music. And it's one of those. And I did like a little piano cover in lockdown just on Instagram. And it's such a simple song. And often they're the best, aren't they? Just 2 or 3 chords and a lovely melody. And that's all it is. But it's a lovely way to close an album as well. Very, very gentle.
It'd be a lovely way to close the playlist, because we put one together to accompany the podcast with all of the songs that we've spoken about today, and obviously we'll put some of your music on there as well. So lockdown's a thing of the past, and gigs are happening, festivals are happening, normal services resume pretty much. What's happening for the rest of the year, mate?
Pretty busy. Our album's out in just under 2 weeks now, on the 14th. And on that day, we start a UK Europe tour, supporting Alexis on Fire, which is going to be dead exciting.
Wicked.
Yeah, listening to them a lot as a teenager, so I've been looking forward to seeing them play every night. And we're also doing like a bunch of HMV and in-stores and a banquet in-store as well, just so every day, wherever we are in that city, we're doing an in-store and a signing. So I'm singing for my supper that week. It's going to be a lot of fun. And then, yeah, we have some shows at the end of the year, which I'm not allowed to announce yet, but the details of that will be coming very soon. So keep your eyes peeled on our social media if you're into the band and you're listening for that stuff. But yeah, and other than that, this is only part 1 of a double album that we're making. The second part is being developed currently, so that's every day I'm kind of tuning in with the boys and getting to work on that, and that's kind of an ongoing project really. So we're never idling, we're always working, but I love it. It's very lucky to call it my job, and I never ever take it for granted.
Lovely. And if people want to keep up to speed, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter?
Yeah, all on there, all the standard stuff. You type in Boston Manor, you'll find it. But yeah, we do. We also have a Discord as well. That's kind of one of the modern forms of social media we've adopted that we're quite enjoying. So if you go on our normal social medias, you'll find a link to that. And it's quite a cool little community we've got going there. Everyone we hang out in there and chat to people, and it's really nice. We're very lucky to have a really cool fan base. So if you're really sort of into the music and you want to kind of keep in very up to date with what's going on, we put tour dates and things in there before we put it everywhere else, and we do kind of like special merch that isn't available to the wider world on there. So if you want to tune into that, then look us up on the internet and you'll find it.
Well, we'll tag you in everything when this comes out. Henry, I've had an absolute ball today, mate. It's been a real joy.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was a lovely conversation. Really enjoyed it.
Absolute pleasure. I'm going to press stop. Don't go anywhere.
Okay. I meant to say, actually, you mentioned